welcome to today's short leadership lesson. Given the situation we find ourselves in and the challenges that we're all feeling, no doubt, this is a timely opportunity to look at our own leadership and what might we be doing to contribute to a healthier society, a better workplace setting. And I want to address today what it means to lead in a virtual team. Interesting fact is, in about 2004, things like Facebook and Skype did not exist. Virtually unknown, yet today we find ourselves in a virtual space where those sorts of technologies and those tools are highly critical to success in terms of how we're going to connect at a social level as well as in teams. The interesting question is, well, what actually changes for a leader in a virtual environment? What do you do differently as a leader? Does anything actually change? Well, I would argue that perhaps in some ways, nothing actually changes. You as a leader continue to be the leader you are. Some things you might need to enhance and focus on, but ultimately, leadership still is essentially the same thing. So what changes? Well, firstly, there's going to be a change in the cultural norms. As you work with your virtual team, clearly the environment changes for you. There's also a loss of body language. While you can see me here giving you expression in this video, that's not always going to be the case for your virtual team. There's certain tones and pitches and just the way that people interact in person that you might miss out on. And that opens up opportunity for communication, if you like, to be missed. So what we hear about in any team, regardless of whether you're virtual or face-to-face, is this idea of synchronous and asynchronous. In a sense, in a virtual team, those two things, those two factors are important to consider as you develop your team. When you're working in a synchronous virtual team, how rapidly are you responding to each other? Or is it asynchronous? And of course, the role of the leader actually changes. Your role changes from a mediator to a facilitator, to a mentor, to a coach. Essentially, what your role is as a leader is to provide structure and provide guidance. The key challenge really at the end of the day in a virtual team and leading a virtual team is going to be around performance and motivation. It's about bringing the best of everyone together. And the great thing about a virtual environment is that you can do this wherever you are. You can bring the best people from across the globe together to work on your project. So that's kind of an exciting thing. The other thing you need to consider as a leader is the competencies of the team. Are they competent as team players? Are they competent in the tasks that they have? And do they have the virtual competencies? In other words, do they have the ability to work with the technology at hand? And if they don't, your role as a leader is to enable those abilities. And so in that, the performance and motivation, there's four things perhaps that you as a leader might want to focus on. You want to provide that feedback, regular feedback. And essentially, as you're providing feedback on the work that they're doing virtually, is they're enhancing their own self-efficacy. Because let's face it, they're going to be working on their own a lot of the time. So they need to find that motivation. Your feedback will give them a motivational sense. You also need to understand that how are the goals of the team actually going to be measured? Now, I'm not going to go into technology around this. There's plenty of technology out there in the world that can help you manage the project deadlines and the project schedules. But at the end of the day, there has to be a way that your virtual team understands that. It's also about ensuring that there's a shared workload. And that's evident that, in other words, through whatever tools you're using, that each person in your team can see that they're not just working on their own, but they're actually collaboratively contributing to this. We don't want to see a situation where one person is working awfully hard and the other person perhaps slacking off. And then the fourth thing, in terms of motivating your virtual team, is constantly remind them and connect them to the bigger picture. What is it that their work is doing that's contributing to the organizational success? Remind them of this. Now, research has shown that the most effective leaders in a virtual team are those that would mentor, and they show a high degree of concern for those in their team. In other words, they just focus on relationships. How you do that in a virtual environment is just a little bit more challenging. But if you're going to be a great leader, this is the work that you're going to be doing regardless of where you find yourself. Ultimately, for me, a virtual team and leading in a virtual team requires exceptionally good communication skills. Now, as a leader, what that means is providing very regular, detailed, and prompt communication to your team. In other words, keeping them up to date. With that, what happens in a virtual team is without those communication gaps being filled, lots of assumptions can be made. And it's your role as a leader to provide that feedback and pick up on when those instances of assumptions being made. Could be through a breakdown in technology, could be through the simple fact that people work in different spaces and different times in a virtual team. And so we have to be a little bit more acutely aware of how people work in a virtual team. Ultimately, your goal as a leader is to build the relationships within your team, to foster it and to grow it. And you do that well, you're providing leadership. The exciting thing about virtual teams is that leadership has the opportunity to show up in multiple places. That means we're not just looking from a top-down model of leadership anymore, we're actually looking at a very much an ecosystem of leadership where everyone and every piece of technology has an opportunity to provide some form of leadership. So in this challenging times, as we move into perhaps what might be a new wave and a new century of working together, leadership thrives in a virtual team. Leadership can thrive and excel and accelerate the way we do our work. Go out and be a great